So let's go ahead and jump into Genesis. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. Now, why did God create it this way? I have no idea. But this is what he did. What this says, if you go back to your Hebrew and read it carefully there, you'll find out that it's saying that when he created the earth, it was completely covered with water. We'll get back to that in a moment. But that's what it says. There was just this water. That's all there was. Nothing there. Big ball of water. Okay, let's go to the next verse. Okay, then God said, "Let there be light." Now, understand that light, our idea of what light is, can confuse us here because we've got some lights on here. Even if we turned off all the lights in here, we could still see because there's light coming in from the sun through the windows. So, we think of light that way, but let's look at that next slide. I want to point out here, that whole range is light. We typically call it the electromagnetic spectrum, but all of that is light. There's that one little darker blue line across there, and they've expanded it so that we can see that's what we think of as light. But if you look down below there, the next thing below that is infrared rays. The infrared rays are just past the red on this scale here. Remember that whole violet down through red is that little narrow blue line. So the next thing below there, and much bigger than all of that, is infrared. Going up, above there, above the violet, is ultraviolet. And again, it's larger, maybe not as large as infrared, but it is larger. And that area is our ultraviolet light. Notice the word ultraviolet light. And you can get cameras that can see into the infrared. You can get cameras that can see into the ultraviolet. Because it is all part of light. Keep going up above that, and you find X-rays. And really, X-rays include part of the ultraviolet, the end of the ultraviolet area, and the beginning of the gamma rays. So X-rays is more than just, some of the X-rays at different frequencies are considered ultraviolet. Some X-rays are considered gamma rays. And then above that you have, who knows how far up, gamma rays. We get them throughout the universe. Yes, the sun creates some gamma rays. Other suns, other stars create some gamma rays. But that's not where most of the gamma rays in the universe come from. We don't know where gamma rays come from. But the universe is permeated with gamma rays. Now, jumping back down the other direction, underneath the infrared, but partly overlapping with it, we have what we call radar waves. And below that you have microwaves. Well, all radar waves are microwaves. And then you have below that television waves and radio waves. And at this very moment, that whole spectrum, every bit of it, is flowing through right now. At night and at day, all of that is there all of the time, just that some of it we see better than other parts of it. But it's all light. So when it says, jump back one slide, please. When it says God said, let there be light, and there was light, and God saw the light that it was good, and God divided the light from the darkness. So there is darkness somewhere. I have no idea where. Maybe that's outside our universe. I don't know. When I get to heaven, maybe I'll find out some of these things, but I don't know at this point in time. God divided the light from the darkness, and God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. So the evening and the morning were the first day. Literally, that last sentence is, the evening was and the morning was the first day. So, we've got dark and we've got light. And dark is a relative term because from God's perspective, what is dark? I mean, how much can he not see? I'll put it that way. How much of what's out there can God not see? Several shaking heads. None of it. God can see everything. From the physical standpoint, God can see it all. And certainly from the spiritual standpoint. But from the physical standpoint, too, he can see everywhere. The Bible talks about that in other places about if I go down into the depths of the sea, if I go down into the depths of the ground, if I go out and do, wherever I go, no matter how high, how low, or whatever I do, God can still see me. There is one interesting point, for instance, up in 1 Corinthians, it talks about God cannot could not look on sin. Maybe that's the darkness. I don't know. But not at this point. Okay, go back to the slide we were just on. So, that is what God created, light. Oh, and the next one. God created light and divided it up into day and night. Okay, now, then God said, after the first day, let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters. What's this firmament? Remember what the earth was at that point? If you looked at it from the outside, all you would see is water. I'm assuming that there was rock, molten lava, and all those kind of things underneath that. I don't know. It doesn't tell us. But I'm assuming that there was simply because, well, that's what we have now, so maybe that was down under the water before then. I don't know. But it says he created a firmament in the midst of the waters and let it divide the waters from the waters. Well, what does that mean? Well, let's keep reading. Thus God made the firmament and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament, and it was so. And God called the firmament heaven. Not heaven in the sense that we talk about heaven and hell today, but that word is sky. And if you think about it, right here where my hand is at the moment, that's sky. Up here is sky. Above the roof is sky. In other words, our atmosphere is the heavens. Now, because of the special number of God being 7 and so on, people have used that term and taken it all kinds of ways. And so the ancient Hebrews believed there were 7 heavens. The part that we're standing in at the moment, the part that we see when we look up above us and see the clouds, the part that's above that, where the stars are, and so on. Okay, so God created the earth as a ball of water, possibly with solid rock or something inside that. I don't know. He created water, and then he created light, and he named the dark and the light phases as day and night, or night and day, since in Hebrew it always starts with the nighttime and then the daytime. It calls it here evening and morning. I would call it the night and the day were one day. Whatever. Anyway, So there's this firmament. By the way, that word firmament, rakia in Hebrew, basically means something that was beaten out real thin. You know how if you were to take some gold, you could pound on it and it would get flatter and flatter and flatter. I don't know exactly what this firmament was, but some people think that there was a firmament up there in the upper atmosphere that separated us from space. Go to the next picture, and we'll do a couple of these slides fairly quickly. So notice around the thing, the sun is coming from up that way. You can tell because notice over on this side, you can't see very well how thick that layer is. But you can still see off at the sides a layer above the Earth of atmosphere. And you can see that over on this side where the sun is, it's a lot bigger than what you can see over here where the sun is not shining. So the point is there is a range of atmosphere. And that atmosphere is really just as big almost all the way around. Yes, I know it shrinks a little bit on the dark side, the night side, and grows back again as the sun turns to day. But I mean, we're talking about a few miles out of hundreds of miles of total distance. Typically, we use 100 miles or 100 kilometers, which is 62 miles, roughly as our border between our atmosphere and space. But you notice people have used both of those numbers, 100 kilometers, 62 miles, and 100 miles as that border between atmosphere and space. 62 to 100, we're talking about nearly 40 miles difference. So the numbers are kind of arbitrary. We like nice, neat numbers, so we use 100. And if we use mile system, we'll use 100 miles. And if we prefer kilometers, we'll use 100 kilometers. Exactly where that atmosphere ends is kind of hard to say, because some of it is always constantly escaping into space, and there's more of those molecules of air at different distances. Anyway, so this firmament, go to the next picture. By the way, no, I'll come back to that picture in a little while, so we'll do it then. This is also trying to show you the gradations. Up at the top, it's so dark a blue that it's not quite black, but it's getting there. The camera is actually looking through some of that, and so it's seeing some of that blue color anyway. And you get down far enough and you get to the clouds, and some of those clouds can go even further up than we see here, but there's a limited amount of distance. Okay, so that is the atmosphere, the heavens that it talked about when it said he separated the waters below the firmament and the waters above. Remember I mentioned that rakia itself actually means a beaten out piece of metal. Some people think that what that means is there was hydrogen out there pounded down by God to a real thin layer so that light, because it's fairly transparent, light could come through it, and there was water above it and water below that. The water below it would be the clouds, and there was this humongous layer of ice out there. I don't know the details. I just know that that's what some people believe. And which way? Who knows? I wasn't there. You weren't there. We humans weren't there. So we don't know all that. Okay. But that is the firmament, the heavens. And maybe there was this layer, I don't know. Go on to the next slide. By the way, just a reminder, you've all sung this song before, and the skies are not cloudy all day. Maybe that was back before the flood. Because The one Bible verse tells us in the next chapter that there was no rain. Mist came up from the ground. Basically dew, heavy dew. But there was no rain. Well, if there was no rain, then there probably weren't any clouds. So maybe that's what that song is talking about. Next slide. And no, I'm not really suggesting that those guys were thinking of that when they wrote that song. I'm just... Okay. Then God said, let the waters under the heavens be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear. Notice up to this point, this globe has been covered with water. But now he's moved stuff, and we now have land. I'm going to come back to that later, but the point is God called the dry land earth, the gathering together of the waters he called seas, and once there's land, God said, let the earth bring forth grass, the herb that yields seed, the fruit tree that yields fruit according to its kind, whose seed is in itself on the earth, and so on. So we see all those things were created on the third day. Remember, we had light, then we had separation of the waters, and now we finally get to see land and plants. Next slide. This is just a reminder. That was that slide I showed you earlier, and I said I'd come back to it again. That slide, the earlier time, it wasn't showing the pre-day 3. It was showing day 3, because here we have land and water separated. I was doing it for the firmament part, because we didn't have any cameras back there before, so we couldn't see the firmament back then. Okay, next slide. I just wanted you to see that here we have them separated. And by the way, notice we had clouds as well. Again, this is from today, not day 3, but day 3 was when that ocean out there separated from the land and all those plants, and ignore the people on the beach and so on, because, as I say, that's today. But it would have been like that without those people in the way. And they're pretty small anyway, so you can't really see them too well anyway. Okay, go on. The point is, day 3, this is when we first saw land and plants. Day 3. Day 4. Then God said, let there be lights. Before we had light on day 1. Day 4, let there be lights in the firmament of the heavens to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and seasons. Before there was light and dark, whether anybody could have seen the dark if they'd been standing there. You remember in The Magician's Nephew, at least I know somebody remembers The Magician's Nephew, and how they were there when Aslan sang the earth or Narnia into creation. And they got to actually see it. We don't. We weren't there. But we are told that now he creates the lights in the sky. Specifically, let them be for lights, to give light on the earth. Then he made 2 great lights, the greater light, sun, to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night. Now, there's a couple of possibilities as to when the change occurred, but originally, sun during the daytime and moon during the nighttime. Today, this moon can be any time of day or night, depending upon its phases. The earth has changed since God created it. But back then, he made the sun and the moon to rule the day and the night, and he made the stars also. And he set them in the firmament of the heavens to give light on the earth and to rule over the day and over the night and divide the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. So the evening and the morning were the 4th day. Now I'm going to come back to this, but I just want to remind you, if evolution were true, you couldn't have had it happen in this order. You couldn't have had those plants. See, some people take this one verse, well, a couple of places where it talks about, days as 1,000 years in God's sight, and so on and so forth. And so, okay, these days were billions of years or millions of years or whatever. Those plants were living without sun or moon or stars for millions or billions of years? No. They used photosynthesis from the sun to create their energy, to grow. And here we don't have the sun until day 4. Yes, we had days because God knew what was the day and what was the night, or the evening and the morning as it's put here. Okay, next one. And this is just talking about how in Greek, any light in the sky, the little lights up in the sky were called aster, star. And some of those stars, they began to realize, were in certain clumps. So they would call this clump of stars up there, well, I'll use our terminology, the Big Dipper and the Little Dipper. This other set would be Orion, and this other set, and so on. They got their names that way. Now, they also realized that there were a few stars that didn't stay in their positions. They wandered. And so they called those aster planeta, planets, which basically means a wandering one. So they thought of them as stars that wandered. They didn't visualize them as being like we think of planets today. But they did think that they were stars that went wandering around. They made careful observations of all of these, and if you read that tiny text over there on the right, it says some things. I'm going to skip over that, but I considered covering it, but I didn't want to take the time. So go on to the next slide. Any of you remember Motel 6? Yeah. We ended up deciding to not do it or to do it. I can't remember. Okay. Looks like she did have it. And excuse the ads if they come on.
We've been leaving the light on for a long time. You might think maybe it would start flickering or get tired of lighting away. Maybe take a day off from welcoming weary travelers with a clean, comfortable room for the lowest price of any national chain. Nope, still burning brightly. I'm Tom Bodette from Motel 6, and we'll leave the light on for you.
And God left lights in the sky so that we could see, because he didn't make our eyes to see that whole electromagnetic spectrum. So he left the light on for us. And there's a moon or a sun in the sky, both of which provide us some light. God left the light on long before Motel 6 thought of it. Next slide. Then God said, "Let the waters abound with an abundance of living creatures." So, I don't know if you're aware, I talked about the plants using photosynthesis to live, to grow. But they breathe. What do they breathe in? What do the plants breathe in? Carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, and that kind of stuff. What do they breathe out? What would have happened if those plants had been there for a few hundred years, let alone a few million or billion years, without any animals? They would have used up all the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and breathed out, and then they would have died because of all that oxygen, which would have been killing them. So if these days are long periods of time, then there's a problem here. So, he created the birds and the sea creatures on day 5. And some of these things basically all of them breathe in oxygen. It may be through their gills or something like that. I'm not going to worry about the details. But they exhale one way or another carbon dioxide and other related ones. Needs both sets. A couple of days, day 3 to day 5, sure, no problem. A few million years between when the plants were there and the animals, no. Okay, next day. I've just had something that shows some of the different kinds of critters that were created on day 5. That I don't want to go that direction. Next slide. I did this one because it evokes that concept of Jesus walking on the water. And remember a couple of times they couldn't get any fish. And he says, well, throw your net on the other side. Well, we've already thrown it on both sides. But Jesus said, throw your net on the other side. Okay. He's not a fisherman. Let's toss it over. Wait, the net's too full. It's beginning to break. And Jesus goes walking on the water, creating all of this stuff. The birds, the sea life. So day 5. Next slide. Okay, day 6, next to the last day of the week. I know this is too tiny to read very well, but then God said, let the earth bring forth a living creature according to its kind, cattle and creeping thing and beast of the earth, each according to its kind. And it was so. And God made the beast of the earth according to its kind, cattle according to its kind, and everything that creeps on the earth according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, let us make man in our image. Same day. Notice it hasn't said we've gone to another day yet. Let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over the cattle that creep, or over the cattle, over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. Then God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth, subdue it, have dominion over the fish of the sea. By the way, be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, subdue, have dominion. All of those are words that are used of an invading army going into some place. I have no idea if that's what those words meant when God originally said them, or if that's changed because we people have chosen to think that God has put us in a position to go invading this area and taking over and doing all these terrible things. But it is true that those words get used of an invading army throughout time after that. Anyway, I don't think that's what God was talking about. And then I'm going to ignore a little bit of that there at the end because it's not what I'm trying to cover at the moment. It's important. And I even have a big chunk of it underlined because it's so important. But we're running out of time, so I'm going to go on to the next slide. And here you see a human, you see different kinds of animals. I'm not sure that that peacock really belongs on this slide or whether that belonged on the other one, but they don't fly very much, so maybe it does belong here. I don't know, because God didn't divide things up the way we do. It specifically tells us elsewhere that the bats were created on day 3 with the flying birds, because just like planets and stars are the same thing in Greek, their definition of birds meant those things that go flying in the sky, not the little bitty ones that go flying and poke you in the arm and make you go slapping. That's not birds. It's those other kinds, bats and what we call birds. Same thing here. Is a peacock? I don't know. How God divided things up, he doesn't tell us. Incidentally, he did say in the next chapter that God created these, and then he had brought them to the man and said, what do you want to call this? So he may have brought them to them because it specifies according to their kind. He may have specified or may have brought them by their kinds. We talk about species, and we have billions of species. Whether God, when he brought them to them, brought them in such a way that he brought to Adam, 100 kinds. I don't know. But again, that's neither here nor there for our purposes. Next slide, please. And the last day of the first week was when God rested from all his work. Did God need to rest? I mean, was he tired and worn out from all his work? No. But he chose to rest, or shalom, from what he had been doing. And he says specifically that it's for us. We're created in his image, and we are supposed to rest on the seventh day. Not too many of us do that anymore, but we'll ignore that detail. The main thing is, he rested from all his work on day 7, and that's actually the first few verses of chapter 2. I don't know why. Because really, should have gone through days 1 through 7 in chapter 1. But that's, again, neither here nor there. Those chapters and stuff were not in the original. That's something that we've added in since then. Okay. Next slide. Here they're basically showing us the pattern of evolution, Big Bang, stars, sun, molten earth, and first oceans. Remember, we looked at that thing with a big cloud of gas turning into a star and planets. Just because of gravity, as there's more and more of that, it eventually gets to the place where it would do this kind of thing. And now you have a sun, and notice that after the sun, those planets out there are molten. Every single one of them would have to be molten if it worked the way evolution is claiming. And eventually you would end up with oceans. Down here in the bottom, it's showing us day 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Day 1, you had the earth created with its light and then its firmament. And then on day 3, you had the plants. Day 4, you had the sun and moon and the stars. Day 5, you have the ocean animals and the flying animals. And day 6, you have the animals and man. Okay, let's go to the next slide, because it is going to be hard for you to read, but I'm going to read a few of these things just to give you an idea. On the one side, they're talking about evolution order, and then on this side, Genesis order. In evolution, the sun came before the earth. But notice that in Genesis, what came first? The sun or the earth? The earth. Backwards from evolution. Dry land before sea. Notice that in Genesis, you have the ocean or the water surrounding the whole planet, and there was no land yet. But in evolution, it insists that that molten lava eventually cooled off and became land. And when it did that, it caused the water molecules and some of the things to escape and become a gas, which eventually became water coming out of the sky. Opposite of Genesis. Genesis says that there was a sea before there was an atmosphere. Back in the beginning, that's what we had. And it wasn't until he separated the waters that we had the atmosphere. And they claim that the atmosphere was up there before the sea. Genesis says there was light on earth before there was a sun. Evolution claims that the first light was from the sun. By the time the earth became an earth, the sun was already shining out light. Genesis says earth before the other planets. Remember, aster was that Greek word for stars. Well, Hebrew had the same basic word, which meant that there were stars before there were the other planets. Land before the sea creatures before the land plants. Starfish before earthworms before starfish. I mean, you look through this whole long list. You go back to that quote by Maimonides, Moses ben Maimon, Moses the son of Maimon. He said, if there's a discrepancy, guess which one is right. Either your science has not yet figured it all out. And remember, where does science come from? It comes from us, our human minds, trying to figure out what things are and how things work. So, the point I'm making here, go on to the next one. The point I'm making here is we keep seeing this particular problem of us wanting to say, this is the way things are. Science is, I come up with a hypothesis, I try it out, and eventually I verify that it works or that it doesn't. Now, English, we've had this saying for a long time, tell them what you're going to tell them, tell it to them, and then tell them what you told them. That's how a lot of English speakers, let me rephrase that, people who are going to speak to other people, teachers, preachers, politicians have been taught to tell them what you're going to tell them, tell it to them, and then tell them what you told them. That's English. It works in a lot of other languages too. Hebrew does things differently. They like their parallelism instead of the rhyming type of poetry. So I have an example there. May the day perish on which I was born, and the night in which it was said, a male child is conceived. That's not two separate things. That's just wording the same concept in two ways. May that day be darkness. May God above not seek it, nor the light shine upon it. That's not three different things. That's emphasizing this concept, expanding so that you see it from other perspectives. In the same way, they also have other things which we won't go into. You know, Psalm 119. You have these 8 verses that start with the letter Aleph, and then you have 8 verses that start with the letter Bet, and then 8 verses that start with Gimel, and then 8 with Dalet, and so on, all the way down to the end of the alphabet. Hebrew has 22 letters, so it goes through all 22 letters that way. Those kind of things, not rhyming, is what they thought of as important. Anyway, that's just a side point there. This parallelism, people say, well, there's 2 stories of creation, Genesis 1 and then Genesis 2, and it's a different order in Genesis 2. No, it's not a different order. It's just a way of putting things. And I'm not going to take the time, but go ahead to the next slide. I'm not going to take the time to go through all this, but the verses 4 through 6 are getting you prepared for day 6. And this is where it talks about that mist went up from the earth and watered the whole face of the ground because there wasn't any rain. After all, there wasn't any humans to be fruitful, multiply, have dominion over, etc., etc. So that part is getting you prepared, and then go to the next slide. And again, we're not going to read through this, but it talks about things. And the Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living being. The Lord God had planted a garden eastward in Eden, and so on and so forth. Now, by the way, a lot of your translations will just simply say in verse 8, the Lord God planted a garden. And so they say, oh, see, that happens next. In Hebrew, it's the points you're wanting to get made at the moment, not the chronological order. So, chapter 1, we saw the creation of the earth. Now we're seeing some things, and remember those verses 4 through 6 were the details preparing us for day 6. And specifically the creation of man on day 6. And then it goes through and talks about what happened on day 6 and how things got to that point. But from God's perspective, this is talking about the humans and how he built them and created them, because the next thing that comes is chapter 3, which talks about the fall. So, it looks at the important things and talks about them and mentions, oh yeah, God had planted a garden out there, and yeah, there was this stuff with the garden and so on. This is this order of creation and the other was a different order of creation. No. It's a difference in perspective. So he told us in the first 2 verses, God created the heavens and the earth. Then in the next verses of chapter 1, he told us what happened. And now, in chapter 2, he's telling us what he told us, but with certain details. That parallel thing is happening again and again. So, the point is, it is important for us to understand that science is us trying to understand what God did. But science does not have the final answer. It's constantly changing. Every single year, science says, no, this isn't the way. I remember when the first guys came out talking about dinosaurs being warm-blooded. And no, they're lizards. That's what the word dinosaur means, is a thunder lizard. They're cold-blooded. But enough science research was done by creationists to find out that, wait, these things were warm-blooded, or some of them were. And those evolutionists fought it tooth and nail for years. During my childhood and up until I was a young adult, it was a long time before science would agree that it turns out that, yes, those dinosaurs were warm-blooded, or a lot of them. A lot of them, that's a key point, because, well, they're not all the same thing. We call them all dinosaurs, but they're not all the same critter. But anyway, that's a separate issue. So, we don't always understand what the facts are, and we don't always understand that we don't understand that. So what we need to help our kids do is understand some of these things and what the differences are. It can make a difference. If people have been brainwashed into believing that God used evolution, then they have to believe that, well, what the Bible says isn't specifically accurate. Yeah, it's got some good thoughts in there. But at which point, you can pick and choose which ones you want to believe. Or you can understand that, well, science is trying to catch up to God, but hasn't yet. They're still trying to use his dirt to do their experiments instead of creating their own dirt. Anyway, that's all I've got at the moment. Thank you.